That's what I'd say to every dad listening, that our role is not to imprint our DNA upon our son, but to recognize and call out the DNA, the calling that God's already placed in them. I think that's a primary role of dad. My dad was not a spiritual guy at all. Never went to church with us. He really wasn't born again until I was in college, almost married. But the thing that my dad did, he spoke life to me without even knowing it. He told me he loved me all the time. He hugged me. He was a kisser. I mean, my dad would kiss on me and make me embarrassed, and my dad's a big tough guy. My dad was a man's man, hunter, fisherman, kind of redneck guy. I loved him. But I'll tell you what my dad did well is my dad took me through rites of passages without me even knowing it. Like I remember getting my first knife, him trusting me with that at 9 or 10 years old. I had guns. I can't remember not having a gun. And I remember my dad purposely teaching me gun safety, putting me in places where, I could make mistakes, but safe mistakes is what I call them. So my dad, he didn't have any training like that. I don't know how he did it so well but he did. He taught me manhood without even intention. And if you would have asked him, what are you doing for your son? He wouldn't have been able to even tell you. It was just natural for him. Natural manhood came easy from my dad. Now, spirituality was something he wrestled with, and so when I grew up, I understood manhood as far as taking responsibility, working hard, being honest, say what you mean what you say, were things that my dad would say. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Do the right thing and swear to your own hurt. He was very honest and hardworking. So I got all that. I grew up knowing how to work hard, knowing how to show up at my job on time, knowing how to those things that men need to know. What was the gaping hole in my heart was he had never explained Jesus to me. My mom was the spiritual leader in my home, and I just needed a man early on to tell me what they saw. I thought I saw things in me that God had put in me, but I was afraid to even tell anybody because I just didn't believe them. So that's what young men and women need. They need dads to come along and say, I see what you see about yourself. I see that in you. It's not that they're adding anything to your life. Many times it's just confirming what you suspect about yourself. And so I remember the first time a guy named Richard Humphreys, he and I were praying down front. He was a pastor at Trinity Fellowship, and I was just a member of the church. And I remember he and I were praying for this woman, and while I was praying for her, I got this strong impression, and so I just shared what I was feeling with her. It turned out it was really accurate. He looked at me and said, Brady, you've got a prophetic gift in you, and you really hear the Lord. And I thought I did. So I just began to seek out men in my life who I admired and respected, and I just began to come alongside them and serve them. And along the way, the Lord brought Jimmy Evans, Tom Lane, Robert Morris, those guys into my life, and each one of them had a role of speaking into me, of seeing things in my heart that I thought I saw in myself, and they called it out of me. And I think that's when I realized I got to do this for my kids. And I have a great story. I adopted my son. My son Abram is adopted. Both my kids are adopted. And Abram's story is really unique because his birth father was a nuclear physicist who had got a girl pregnant at the church where we attended. But he was brilliant. I mean, his birth father was brilliant. And when Abram was born, there's a picture that Pam and I have of Abram. He's sitting in his bassinet. He's like 2 or 3 weeks old, and he's got a baseball uniform on. And I remember the first thing I ever bought for Abram was a baseball glove. And this thing was a small glove, but he was so tiny the glove just looks giant. But it's on his hand. He's sitting in the bassinet with this giant baseball glove on his hand and his baseball uniform, because I just had assumed that Abram, because he's my son, is going to be a baseball player, because I grew up playing baseball. And so, of course, he's going to be a baseball player. Well, Abram, when he turned 5 or 6, showed no interest at all in sports, none. I'd throw the ball at him and it hit him. I'd had to roll it to him. He'd roll right by him. He didn't care. So I put him on a t-ball team, thinking, well, he'll catch on. He just needs to be on a team. And so he loved the uniform and he loved the snacks after the game, but he had no interest in the baseball game, none. Didn't want to bat, didn't want to catch, didn't want to throw. And I remember it was the first time I felt real disappointment in him. Like he was not becoming the person that I had imagined him being. He was not going to be a baseball player. And it was like stunning. Just watching him not be a baseball, it was just such a disappointment came into me about him. He's not doing what I thought he would do. And I remember praying one morning in my office, and I said, why am I feeling this disappointment in Abram? And the Lord spoke to me and said, why don't you call out of him what I've put in him? Why don't you recognize, and why don't you put on a different set of eyes and look inside of him, and instead of putting your imprint on him, why don't you find my imprint on him? And I remember it changed the way I fathered. And then it dawned on me, that's exactly what men have been doing for me. You know, they weren't trying to put their imprint on me. They were just recognizing, calling out of me what God had already put in me in the womb of my mother. And it changed the way I've fathered Abram. I mean, it changed the way we don't throw the baseball around because he has no interest. Instead, we talk about Legos and Batman. And I mean, in his mind, superhero is still a job option for him. I mean, he still thinks that. He's 14. He's about to get his black belt in Taekwondo. And if you ask him, why are you getting your black belt? Because he wants to be a spy. You know, he wants to be a superhero. All superheroes know martial arts, right? So that's the kind of young guy he is. And I just have learned to become fascinated by what God's doing in him. And that my role is not to imprint something on him. My role is to confirm and call out. I mean, that's what I'd say to every dad listening, that our role is not to imprint our DNA upon our son, but to recognize and call out the DNA, the calling that God's already placed in them. I think that's a primary role of dad. And we get those roles reversed many times. Dads try to, force their image upon a son, and it's like a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't work, and so we work hard for them to be like us. And it frustrates the son, it frustrates the dad, and I think we're doing them a disservice. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's my journey of discovering I need men in my life to call out of me what God's already put in me.
Let me go back just to the relationship with you. Is your father still alive?
No, my dad died in 2005, colon cancer, 63 years old, very young. He was one of those guys that wouldn't go to the doctor except if things were going horribly wrong, and old school guy. And I tell men all the time, look, go get your annual exams, get colonoscopies, get those things. Early detection is critical. And my dad was stage 4 colon cancer when they finally found what was wrong with him. And so I had about 2.5 years with him. And I was right there with him when he died, and had some good moments with him. But no, he's gone. And since 2005, I really miss him. Almost 7 years. So we're 7 years now. Yeah.
In your relationship with him, and you described him very much of the macho guy, and all the things that kind of go along with that. How did he influence what you believed then God was like?
Well, I certainly saw God as masculine. I saw him as strong. I saw him as capable through my dad. What I didn't see through God was, my dad was very loving, extremely loving. My dad was smothered me with love. So when I tell the story of the prodigal son, the dad running off the porch and grabbing the son and holding the son, that's very much my dad. I have no trouble with seeing God that way because my dad was a physical touch kind of guy, hug, embrace. The thing I miss most about my dad is his hands on me. It's like he just was a great hugger, and and I miss those hugs from dad. But what I didn't get from dad was the ability to hear the Lord's voice and to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. I didn't see that. I didn't know that. I didn't know how to do that, to really lean in and listen. And my dad, I wouldn't describe him as macho. He was a man's man, but not macho in a sense that he was cocky or arrogant about it. He was just very masculine. And but my dad, because he was so strong, he could do a lot without God. And so I grew up being very self-sufficient and I could just do a lot myself. And it took me a long time to really learn to lean in and depend on the Lord, to really come to God like a child. That's hard for some men. To be childlike in front of God, to be dependent, to really trust God, to not try to do it on your own, to not just include God into my plan, but to really cooperate with what God's doing, to find out what God's doing and come about his business, instead of just always asking God. I just noticed my prayers started changing. Instead of asking God to get on board with my agenda, and to check off my boxes every day. I learned through these other men how to listen to God, to be dependent, to hear what God was doing around me and find out how I was supposed to cooperate with Him.
Why do you think it's so difficult for men to admit their weakness or their wound?
Well, our culture tells us that men are supposed to be protectors and providers. I mean, it is some of it's cultural. I mean, the American male is seen as a superhero, John Wayne. You know, we're supposed to be heroic. Well, heroes don't ask for help. Heroes are the ones that give help. So we have a hero culture, in my opinion, that is damaging the soul of men. I mean, we have incredibly high standards for men. In order to be called man in America, there are certain things that we're supposed to live up to. And one of them is we're supposed to be heroes. And we're supposed to be, I just heard this on the radio. This guy was saying, men don't cry. Well, we're not supposed to cry. We can't show our feelings. We can't show our emotions. So we push them inside and we put on this facade of Superman / Batman / whatever. And so we go about our way trying to live up to an impossible standard that you can't do without the Lord. It's just, you can't be a real hero in your home unless you follow in Christ. We know that now. That's a hard lesson to learn for men. And there are men that will go into their 70s and 80s determined to be the hero and determined to be right. And it's hard. It's hard for men.
We'll shift gears. What inspired you to write Sons and
Yeah,
Daughters?
Sons and Daughters came out of a conversation I had with Abram in 2007 in the hallway of my house on a Sunday night. And I just told Abram that he was adopted. He was 8 years old at the time, and we had not told him that he was adopted. So I sat him down and I told him the story of his mom and I adopting him, bringing him home from the hospital, and all those beautiful parts of that story. And a few months later, I was really being very sensitive, trying to pay attention, because a lot of adopted kids go through separation anxiety. They wonder why their other mom didn't want them. They can go through a lot of abandonment issues. So we were prepared as much as we could for all that. And one night, I was laying Abram down. It was a Sunday night. I remember I was tired. I'd been at church all day. And I was praying over him, and I really just wanted to, pray an obligatory prayer and go watch SportsCenter because I was tired. And dads, we all get to that place sometimes, And so I was praying my customary good night prayer over Abram, and he was going to go to bed, and I was going to go downstairs and unwind. And as I was leaving his room, he said, "Dad?" I said, "Yes, Abram." Kind of aggravated a bit that he had interrupted my walk, and he said, "Thanks for adopting me." And I just sat there just stunned, because he's never said that before to me. And I said, "Well, why you say that? Why did you say that, Abram?" He said, "Well, I've just been thinking," he's 8 years old, remember. He said, "I've been thinking that if you had not adopted me, that we wouldn't be buddies." And so now I'm undone by it, So I walked back over to him and I said, "Abram, I'm glad I adopted you. It's the best decision I've ever made. And we're going to be buddies forever and always." So it's a real emotional moment for me, because it's the first time he really ever said something like that to me about his adoption. And he was catching it. His little heart, he was catching that I had chosen him, that I chose to adopt him. And because I made that choice, we were going to be friends always, forever and always. So I got out in the hallway and I just was praying. I was having this conversation with God about Abram. And I said, "Is everything okay with Abram?" I was asking the Lord this. And the Lord said, "That was for you. That wasn't for Abram." And I said, what do you mean it was for me?" He said, "Well, Brady, if I had not chosen to adopt you, we wouldn't be friends either. But I chose you, and we're going to be friends forever and always." So that night launched me into this really deeply personal journey of discovering God as a father that had chosen me. So in Ephesians 1, one of my favorite scriptures, I read it on Sunday, that long ago before verse 4, long ago before the creation of the world, he chose me. He had to adopt me through Christ. And it gave him great pleasure to even think about it. So that scripture, along with the story in Luke 15 of the prodigal son coming home to a father that was filled with compassion for him, that ran toward him, instead of making the son run toward him, he ran after the son. So Ephesians 1, Luke 15, and Abram on a Sunday night in his bedroom launched me into writing that book, Sons and Daughters. As really, I wrote it for Abram and Callie. I didn't care if anybody else read it. I just wanted them, if, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I wanted them to know my story of hearing God and knowing God as Father. And I wanted them to really know deeply that they really are sons and daughters, that they can live like that. So the book is really, it tells them how they can live now if they'll believe that. Because it's changed the way I live. It changed the way I'm married. It changes the way I pray. It changes the way I'm friends with other men. It changes the way I raise my kids. Really believing that God's a Father that loves me and that He chose me before I chose Him. It's a big deal. You willing? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just ask. So what is it that's so difficult for men to really get that spirit of adoption, that they are an adopted son of God?
Well, because we all know how messy we are, and I think most people can wrestle to the ground the idea that God would forgive us. Okay, and this is what the story in Luke 15, the prodigal son, and when he says, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to eat? And here I am starving to death. So I'll go back and say to my father, Lord, I've sinned against you and heaven. So take me back as one of your hired men. So he believed that his dad would probably forgive him over time, but he had totally given up on the idea of ever being called son again. He felt like he'd just done too much. And in our works culture, our culture of self-preservation, of ambition and getting ahead and doing the right thing, we believe that our own merits are enough. And when we fail, and most men have had, most men have had big failures. Most men that are listening to this have probably committed one of those big sins, one of those ones that we don't talk about in church. It's not polite, but we've probably all found ourselves in that spot. And we look around at the church culture that we're a part of, and we look at these men who seem to have it all together, because all of us are wearing these church masks, all right? So the culture in most churches is everyone is behaving well, but you know what's going on in your heart, and you don't measure up to that. I am not the man that they think I am. That's the first thought that comes into these men. I am not who they think I am. But I'm afraid for them to find out. So because I'm afraid for them to find out the real person, I'm going to control my relationships, and I'm never going to really be vulnerable and transparent. So we learn to live with this goofy church mask on, pretending that everything is okay, when we know it's not. But we can't imagine us really telling the truth, because then we would be exposed, so we start posing. And I think that's the culture that most of us find ourselves in the local church. It's not a place. The safest place to fail should be the local church. The safest place to be truthful should be the local church. When in fact, it's the most dangerous place to fail in most cases, and it's the most dangerous place to tell the truth, because the penalty for telling the truth in most churches is you get ostracized. You get labels put on you. So you're 50 years old and you're struggling with porn? What the heck? What are you doing? What's happening? You can't kick this? So instead of me being transparent with someone and asking for help, I just go deeper, I push it deeper, I push it deeper, and I put on more and more complex church mask. And it pushes the idea of forgiveness and redemption. I think forgiveness and redemption are two different things. Forgiveness is when we wipe the slate clean. The Lord says, you're white as snow. Redemption, though, is God restoring us back to our original intent. So God wants to forgive and redeem, right? And the redemption is, He wants to return us to sonship. And that's the story in Luke 15. So the son's coming home, and he says to the dad, the rehearsed speech, I've sinned against heaven and against you. Take me back as one of your hired men. The father doesn't even acknowledge that. In fact, he doesn't even say anything back to the son about that. He goes, quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put the ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. For this son of mine was dead, but he's alive. He was lost, but he's found. Immediately, the father gives him back his identity. He forgives him, but then he redeems him. And so most men can wrestle to the ground the idea that they can be forgiven. Very few men really believe they can be redeemed, kind of restored back to their original intent. When in fact, God wants to do both. He wants to forgive and redeem. And that's the power of this story in Luke chapter 15, in my opinion. It wasn't that the son came home. That's a good part of the story, that the son came home. But it was more than just forgiveness that the father gave him. It was redemption. All right, so here's I think the plague, if I could, that's a strong word. What's plaguing men right now is a need to prove themselves to someone. That the greatest amount of freedom that I got as a man was when I realized I don't have to prove myself to anyone. I mean, you think about how many men right now are trying to prove something to a dead father, or to a coach, or to some teacher, or mom even. There's a mom wound that a lot of guys have. They're trying to prove something to someone. If men can ever get to the place where they really believe that they don't have to prove anything to someone, it's one of the most liberating things that happen to men, I think, when they can take a deep breath and go, I can live in my calling. I can be who God's called me to be without a need to prove myself to anyone. Now, I believe in personal growth and being learners, and I believe in maturity, continuing to mature. I believe in all those things. So I'm not talking about just coasting the rest of your life. I am addressing a bigger issue, though, of motivation. Why are you doing? I mean, every man in my church, I wish I could sit down and have this one conversation. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's motivating you to do what you're doing? Because it's our motives that reveals our heart, right? Our motives, the motive is super important. If you look throughout the lens of Scripture, motive is a big topic that Jesus dealt with. I mean, for example, Jesus said the law says you can't murder someone. I'm telling you, you can't even call them foolish. Motives are important to God. And so I just think that men have these false motives. They're trying to, I'll show you, I'll prove this. I'm not who you told me I'll be, so I'll show you. And it's that need to prove yourself to someone that gets deep inside of a man. And they look up 30 years later and they're still trying to prove something to someone that's not going to come out of the grave and endorse them, and not going to come out of the grave and affirm them. But we have this God in heaven, this perfect Father in heaven that's yelling at us, you are my beloved. You are my son. I mean, at the top of it, I mean, if you could see a picture of God just at the top of his lungs, inviting men into a real relationship that's so secure. If men could really see God that way, I think a lot of men are trying to prove something to God. They're trying to get something from God that God's already given them. I mean, think about what men are asking God in their prayers, asking him for something that he's already given them. And it's like, I just feel like the Lord's frustrated sometimes, like, I've already given you this. The gift of sonship has already been given to us. So we can either try to earn it or we can just receive it. And I think a lot of men are trying to earn something that's already been given them. And I think the mistake that parents are making, that I see among the parents that I pastor, is they are letting Disney raise their kids on TV, and we just are very, very cautious. Now we're not legalistic at our house, and we have a lot of fun at our house, but we don't tolerate a lot of sexuality, inappropriate sexuality that they get to see. And by the way, I think parents need to sit down and watch television with their kids. There are some shows that some of the parents may gasp, but I let my kids watch. But I'm watching it with my kids, and the conversation I'm having is, hey, what message do you think they're trying to speak to you right now? What are they trying to convince you of right now? And it's a good conversation, though. I don't know, Dad. What are they trying to tell me? Well, they're trying to tell you that 16-year-old girls should have boyfriends, that it's okay, that you're weird if you don't have a boyfriend at 15 or whatever. I said, do you believe that? And so it starts good conversations, but we're very careful about protecting our kids' innocence. And we don't allow violence into our home. I mean, I just think a lot of the games that kids are allowed to play, where you can pick if you shoot their head off or shoot their chest, is ridiculous. We might as well be letting them watch porn, in my opinion. I said that out of the pulpit on a Sunday morning, and you could hear an audible gasp. I said, it is proven that when you see bloody violence, it releases a lot of the same endorphins and a lot of the same toxic things into your brain as watching porn. And yet we let them shoot people. We just don't want them to see naked girls, but we let them blow people's heads off. And so my 14-year-old son, most of his buddies are gamers. I mean, they shoot people. And I think we have to teach our kids the sanctity of life, the value of human life. And I had a lot of good church boys walk up to me and say, well, I'm not going to become a serial killer. I was like, no, but you're losing your respect for life, whether you know it or not. And I think dads have to stand, and a lot of the dads are playing the games with their sons. And I had dads come up to me and say, well, that's the one thing my son and I get to do together. Shoot people? And so we wonder why we have this aversion to violence, why young men are going into schoolrooms and killing kids and then killing themselves, because we've played it off as harmless. Well, it's not harmless. And so this is a bit of a rant I'm on, I know, but it's a bit. We've had murder on our campus. We had a young man come on our church campus and kill two of our girls. I was here when it happened. I see the effects that it's having on some young men in our culture, and we just pass it off as harmless and okay. Well, it's not okay. And I think we have to take a stand. I mean, we're quick to take a stand on sexual purity, but I think we're slow to take a stand on human value and violence. Those are two things Pam and I have stood our ground on. We're not going to let a violent culture into our home, and we're going to keep our innocence. We're going to guard our purity and innocence. So those are things that I think have paid off for us as parents.
What is the best thing a father can do for his children?
Pray for them. And there's two things. Pray for them and be passionate about Christ yourself. I think a kid has a better chance of following Jesus if the parents were pagan rather than being lukewarm. And that's proven study, by the way. Lukewarm parents rarely produce passionate followers of Jesus. And so what Pam and I have decided, two things. We're going to pray over our kids, both in front of them and in private. We're prayerful about our kids. But number two, we're going to live out in front of them what we believe to be passionate Christ followers. We have a concern for the poor. We have a love for the scriptures. We love the local church in front of them because we sincerely do love those things. And I think that's where most parents fail. They believe that if they can expose their kids to church, but not really live it out in their own lives. Honestly, I tell parents, I'd rather you be pagan than lukewarm. Your kids will have a better chance of following Jesus if you'll just be purely pagan, rather than come to church and to live out a life. You're not even attempting to live it out. And our kids are pretty smart. Our kids are very perceptive. They can look at us. This generation especially has no tolerance for people that are not authentic. Kids will dismiss an adult immediately if they're not authentic. And so Pam and I mean, we're not perfect about it, but I want to be authentic. I want them to hear me pray. I want them to see me live it out. And I do believe a lot of this is more caught than taught. And they'll emulate who I am rather than what I say I am. And my charge to parents is to live it out. Be passionate for Jesus in private, not just in public. And your kids, I have full confidence my kids are going to love Christ with all their heart and follow Christ. They're going to love the local church. They're going to care for the poor because that's what I do. I just want to encourage dads that they have what it takes. They can do this. I think we've tried to create a superhero culture even in the church where I'll tell you one funny story real quickly, all right? And this will kind of give you a picture of the way I'm raising my kids. Because people assume that I'm having these glorious family devotionals every night at my house. And I read the scriptures with them and we talk about the scriptures, but I'm not superhero to my kids. I want to live it out day by day with my kids. I want them to see me doing it. And I'll teach and I'll direct and all those things. But so we're at this family's house. They're brand new to the church. They invited us over for a meal. And they're really sweet family, just the kind of family you want in your church, So they just moved to town. So we had lunch with them. We're about to leave their house. And the dad says, hey, before you leave, can we have a devotional together? Now my son, Abram, he's about 11 at the time. He goes, what's a devotional? And man, my heart like sunk, because here's the pastor's kid doesn't know what a devotional is. It's just that we don't use that language. And I said, Abram, he wants to read the Bible and we're going to talk about it and pray together. He goes, oh, all right. So having to feel like you've got to get it all right, that you got to use the right words, and you got to, there is no formula here other than pray, read the scriptures, and try to live it out in front of your kids. That's it. And if we could just get it down to the bottom shelf, I think for men have this thing, men have tried and failed, so they quit trying. Because we've set the bar so high. Should we set the bar high? Yes. But let's put it down on the bottom shelf for guys, all right? Guys, my charge to guys is be men of prayer, read the scriptures, and try to live it out in front of your family. And be authentic, be vulnerable, be transparent, learn to apologize quickly. I think our kids, we get a great deal of respect from our kids when we admit that we didn't get it right, and because they know we didn't get it right, so we might as well admit it instead of trying to prove something to them. And learn your kids' love language. Learn that. How do they receive love? How do they give love? Has been a really helpful thing for me. So just being real with your kids and uh, quit trying to be Superman at home. Just be yourself. And I think your kids snip that out really quickly. And they want to be around somebody. First of all, if you can't fail in front of your kids won't learn to fail in front of you. And I want there to be a culture of failing forward at our house, a safe place, a highline act with a safety net underneath, a playground with fences is a better way of saying it. So a place where they can explore, a place where they can really test and fail, but in a safe place where dad's there, mom's there to give them a safety net. And so our house is a big playground with fences around it. And that's the kind of environment I want them to grow up in.
Watch the Father Effect movie for free on YouTube.